Chapter 33, Into the Desert. Into the Desert. They had reached the oasis on Melisand's map just before noon as planned, the deep azure pool ringed by the first green Frithha had seen in days and surrounded by tents from at least a dozen different tribes, that place one of many in the desert where the inhabitants could meet to share news and trade. Melisand had been correct in her initial appraisal. Many of those they spoke to knew of Abizigal's stronghold and refused to approach it. But a small family there to represent the Amma tribe had invited them to speak of it further. Their group knelt about a fire pit, while Rushel and his eldest son had heard their story. A touch of sword hilts had sealed the thing, and by that evening they had joined the main body of the Amma camp, ready to set out into the Agazara, the deep desert. And the way had been hard. The Amma had horses and camels to spare for their gear, and it was certainly fortunate they did, for the heat was exhausting enough, even when they avoided travel over high sun, the days passing in a suffocating dream beneath her blue woolen scarf. They were over halfway on their journey now, 4 days into the desert, and camped at an oasis in the ruins of an ancient palace. According to the headman, Bhaskar, they had cleared a nest of manticores from the ruins only last month, but there was no sign of any return, and the elders had given the nod to unload. The Amma were generous hosts, though their ways were very different from those Frithha had experienced along the Sword Coast. Life with them was regimented, from your duties about the camp, to where you ate and what place in line you traveled was all determined by age, gender, and the status of your family group within the tribe, and Frithha had been, at first, crippled by the worry that everything she did had the potential to offend someone, though such had proved unfounded. As guests, they were left to their own customs for the most part, and in the end it affected little more than their sleeping arrangements. Within the tribe, all those adults who were unmarried were separated by gender and expected to sleep with their own sex in one of 2 large communal pavilions. Frithha drew the stylus back and turned the page, leaving a neat thumbprint on the corner where she had earlier wiped the soot from under her eyes, smudged there that morning to protect them from the desert's glare. She was knelt alone in the women's pavilion, the floor a sea of brightly colored rugs and cushions, lighter fabrics hung from the tent poles above to provide some privacy to the occupants, though few seemed to see them as any more than decoration, the women stripping to their slips as soon as they were cloistered within the heavy canvas walls, no man allowed to enter on pain of banishment. The stylus hung above the fresh page, Frithha's eyes darting up as she considered her next to catch a glimpse of her dusky reflection in the large bronze mirror. She had been putting the last touches to her appearance before she had been distracted by her journal, her collection of bangles and the large hoop earring she had bought more recently, ornate teardrops of jet dangling from the lower curve, now forgotten on the low table before her. She stared at her reflection a moment, familiar yet foreign, swathed in the folds of her deep indigo sari, one of the few impractical items of clothing she had brought with her from Suldanisseller, the memories of Brynlaw and the loss of the men who had presented it to her, keeping it with her even when finer dresses had been left to the elves. Frithha smiled faintly to herself and went back to her diary, enjoying the familiar rasp of the stylus over the thin parchment. Her writing had ebbed and flowed over the years, dependent on circumstance and time, but recently she had become almost obsessive about the thing, even going back over old entries, adding things she had recalled, recording the thoughts she had and observances of the world around her, the girl filled with the desperate urge to leave as much as she could behind for when this all reached its inevitable end. The close to her sentence was punctuated by the slap of the tent flap behind. The journal snapped shut as Jahara's eyes adjusted to the gloom, Frithha's hands back at the table and easing on her bracelets.
"Ah, here you are,"
the woman greeted in a sigh, easing herself down onto the cushions at the girl's back.
"Imoen thought you were sleeping."
A disapproving eye swept across the table and her own bedecked form.
"But I see not."
Frithha smiled at her through the mirror, carefully turning about to face the woman without untucking her sari.
"Brianna and Solafane are going to teach me some new dances, so I thought I'd dress for it." "Indeed,"
the druid continued coolly,
"I notice it is something you are taking the time for of late, and something you seem happy to exploit, too." Do not think I have not noticed you flirting with every trader you meet. Even the merchant traveling here with the Amma is not safe.
Fritha grinned at the memory of bright black eyes and overly familiar hands.
You mean, Mayho? I'm rather proud of that myself for that one. I only went to get some earrings, this collie blouse and a spare kurti, and I walked away with half their value again in gifts. Date.
Jahara waved away the unfolded parchment packet Fritha had proffered her, a frown creeping in.
Thank you, no. You'll forgive my curiosity, but you seem very different now, to the girl I remember from the Balspawn camp happier, and quite determinedly so.
Hazel eyes bored into her. Fritha met them unwaveringly.
I suppose I can merely see an end to things now.
Jahara seemed satisfied with her answer, or perhaps merely the guileless delivery, the woman settling into the real issue that had brought her there.
But before the end, there is still much to be done, and I am interested to hear how you plan to infiltrate a fortress and murder a mage powerful enough to hold dragons in his thrall.
Fritha shrugged, back at the table and fixing on her earrings. It had been the same for days now, doubts that had been easily dismissed back in Amkithran mounting as they closed upon their goal.
I do not know how yet, only that I will. The Amma seems skeptical,
the druid pressed, almost pleadingly.
There are many rumors about this place, though all say that the fortress is well guarded by an army of magical creatures and has no discernible entrance. Fritha, this could be more than our group can handle. I have been speaking to the headman here, Basker, and he is willing to approach the elders regarding an alliance, perhaps even with other tribes.
Fritha pictured it, marching on that shadowy place that lived so far only in her imagination, a whole army at her back. Her stomach clenched, rejecting the wrongness.
No, more men will not win this battle, it must be us, only us. Stealth will be our ally here, of that I am sure. I see.
Jahara paused, finally letting the subject die, at least for the time being, her gaze lower as she nodded to the book resting in the girl's lap.
You have been catching up on your reading.
Fritha snorted.
Well, trying to, but they don't hold my interest like they used to. I'm tired of reading about dull, sighing maidens, heavy with same lot of woes. What's his name loves me, but I love so and so, but he'll never look at me for some insignificant, easily surmountable reason, like.
Fritha continued in her normal voice,
I don't know, an adorable clumsiness or slight gap in her front teeth which detracts from her otherwise flawless countenance. Just once, can't we have a heroine who's built like a siege tower? Who doesn't get the hero, who doesn't even want the hero, because the hero's an arse?
Jahara laughed.
Though that would make a refreshing change, I think you may have to write your own tale, if you are to be that specific.
Yes, Fritha murmured, fingers stroked fondly over the book in her lap,
I suppose so.
She smiled suddenly, slipping the journal under her pack to snatch up the dates and rise in a swell of silks.
Right, I'm off. Help yourself to wine. Wine? And just where did you get that?
Fritha laughed, hopping over the cushions to push past the canvas with a twirl and a skip. Outside, the two pavilions and lesser tents had been pitched to form a half-circle that faced the lush border of palms and vines fed by the waters below and providing shelter from the western winds, the broken stone columns of the palace boundaries just visible through the trees. The younger men were still out of the camp hunting and would not return until the dusk, the women cooking what would serve as their meal that night, while the children played a spinning game, their spindles dropping in time to their rhymes. Imoen and a little girl were trying to teach Valigar the technique, the older men sat about them talking over hands of dice, or helping the children when spindles became stuck. A Nomen was standing on the edge of the group just before the women's tent, the man turning back at the rattle of her approach to offer her a fixed smile that hurt more than if he had not bothered to attempt the gesture at all.
Fritha, you look.
He searched for something suitably bland.
Lovely.
Fritha beamed, determined to have cheer enough for both of them.
Look, oh, who cares about how I look? I sound lovely. The whisper of my skirts, the jangle of my earrings, the clear chime of my bracelets, oh, the sweet cacophony. And who is this music for? Well, me mostly. Brianna and I are meeting up with Solafane to show each other some dances. Ah, I see.
He murmured, not really knowing what else to say, and he glanced over to the woman herself. Brianna sat watching the children play with a disquieted frown. At least one thing was going well for him. He had never had an answer from Brianna as to what had held the girls so long on their first night within the desert, though the woman had returned late and reeking of brandy, and since then there had been a change in her. No longer did she shy from his regard, Brianna seeming more than happy to share his company of an evening, the occasional gift or compliment causing only the merest flicker of embarrassment. And it was pleasant to know that someone cared for him after so long pouring his affections upon a flower that had long ago died in vain hope it would blossom anew. Regret twinged and he willed a steel into his stomach. That was in the past, and he had another regard to cultivate now. And perhaps it was a little more practical than he would have wished, but it was easy and warm and, given time, he could see it growing into something just as strong. Brianna glanced up to catch them watching, her smile eliciting his own, Anomen raising a hand while Fritha lowered her face, deliberately checking her bracelets. The silence between them was beginning to grow uncomfortable, Anomen about to excuse himself altogether when he was stalled by Basker's arrival, the man shedding his dusty traveling robes to reveal a white kurti and sleeveless coat of soft red hide, his scimitar at his hip. Even now they were in camp. The headman was a friendly warrior of middling years, the first signs of grey just beginning to streak his neatly pointed beard, his body strong and athletic even in his age, and kept so by the demands of his position. The title headman could have been a deceptive one, for the Amma had no set leadership, the tribe governed by a council of elders from each family. But it was the headman who was to lead the warriors and scouts in the elders' collective will, and Basker performed his duties with a merry confidence that came from many years' experience and, whatever the situation, his wide mouth was never far from a smile. Something that was no less the case than as his eyes fell upon the girl at Anomen's side, Fritha a mirror of the man as they both placed their palms together for a shared obeisance.
Well, well, and who is this pale northern flower, You have turned Menaha in our midst.
Fritha giggled slyly.
Oh, you can be assured, sir, nothing so virtuous.
Basker's booming laugh started the sparrows from their roosts.
This eve finds you merry, good Basker,
offered Jahara, the women arriving behind them, half an eye on her young charge.
Indeed, it is so, he agreed, for never could I be dull with such fine company, and yet I will be deprived of it soon enough, I fear. Another 2 days and we will reach the last oasis, and there the Amma will remain.
Yes, confirmed Jahara, with barely a glance to the girl.
Matters have been discussed and we believe it is for the best we continue alone. Another day's travel south will find us at the stronghold.
Basker smiled.
Ah, it is likely for the best, our warriors are as strong as any in this desert, but only a fool seeks a fight. And indeed, you are correct, another day south from the final oasis will find you at the stronghold. A fine edifice it is, from what our scouts have reported, untouched by the howling desert winds even for its location. A place of dark magics patrolled by jinn and golems, if the rumors are to be believed, though the desert breeds such tales like sand rats.
He added with an easy laugh.
Why, this very palace itself was once home to some great jinn prince who meant to rule this desert by his magics and who vanished without a trace 1,000 years ago. They say that when the moon is full and the winds still, his court returns from the vale to tempt unwary travelers to join them forever.
He turned his broad smile upon Fritha.
I worried for a moment upon seeing you, that this was true, but the moon will not wax full until 3 nights hence, little Rajkumari.
Fritha's giggling was cut short.
And there you will hold camp until we return,
interrupted Jahara. Bhaskar nodded promptly.
Yes, yes, as we first agreed, and when you return, the riches of that place will be ours for the taking, as was our promise. But truly, such a life is not for fine ladies as yourselves. Put aside these trials of blood and battle and join us here. Have you no father I may speak to?
He pressed to Fritha, the girl hiding her smile behind an affected hand.
We have many young warriors here eager for a wife, and the tribe could make him a fine offer. Why, I myself would trade my horse for you.
Anoman rather thought such talk of trade a little insulting, but Fritha wasn't the one to turn away compliments however they were presented.
So would I. Your horse is lovely, grey and cream like the clouds that gather just before a summer storm. But there is no use in me pining after it, the gods have decreed me a warrior, though I may as well get a bit of dancing in while I can. If you will excuse me.
Another quick obeisance and Fritha was off, skipping over to where the children were at play, though they were soon distracted from their game.
Fritha! Frithadiadi!
And their spinning was forgotten as Fritha swept into their midst, the children all chattering in Alzito and tugging at her sari as she handed out the packet of dates she held.
Ah, such are young girls,
continued Bhaskar paternally,
and a firm hand is needed to guide them and keep them from those whose attentions would mar their worth.
Jahara looked like she was biting her tongue, Bhaskar oblivious to her rained disapproval as he watched the girl, Fritha now entertaining those gathered by teasing a arabescent young lad with a dance, covering him with her veil and shyly singing a song of youthful timidity the girl herself had, if not long since given up, had likely never possessed.
Gunghadna hi kolun jisyan tor edge, umar mori bailey, sharam mohi laj.
The older men were chuckling appreciatively, though theirs were not the only looks Fritha's antics were gleaning. Such opulence as a sari was a rarity there, where the desert demanded the more practical wide trousers and long tunics of simple light linens, and from the gathering of women cooking about the fire pit behind her, the glances ranged from awe to censure to ill-concealed jealously.
Though you need not worry for your friend's honor,
Bhaskar continued cheerfully,
she may have no father to guard her, but she has a suitor clear enough, and there are no young warriors here so brash as to tempt her dark adder, be he about to witness their folly, or not,
he added with a laugh. Anoman snorted.
Fritha is not the catch she seems, sir, it would take the riches of your entire caravan just to keep her in wine.
The headman nodded wisely.
Ah, thus are all women. My Harita is the same.
He gestured to a handsome woman of his own years who was busy supervising the younger women making flatbreads, her ears and throat glinting with gold above the fine amber kurta.
I paid her father a pasha's treasury for her hand, and what a bargain he made of me. She had cost me twice that in perfume and linen within the first year of our union. 3 years after I took her off his hands and he had saved enough to retire to Kalimport, he owns a house full of slaves, now, and his stables are the envy of the merchants' district.
Another booming laugh. Back at the circle, one of the women had arrived to usher the children back to their spinning with a purse-lipped frown. If Fritha was offended, she did not let it show.
Come on, Brianna, Solophane's waiting.
The ruins were hot and cool by turns, dark forgotten rooms of deep shadow checkered with bright, stone courtyards open to the amber sky. Fritha led the way, remembering the turns and alleys to the place she and Solophane had found in their earlier explorations, when half the camp dozed away the high sun. She stepped into one of the main courtyards, the floor a shimmering square of white where the fading light caught the brimming pool set there and fed by the waters below, the oasis's bounty the likely reason that palace had first been built there so long ago. The golden stone were walls engraved with scenes of people and animals at eternal play in some verdant land far from the desert's ravages, while above carved clouds, jinn, and other spirits of air swooped and danced. Even now the sun was setting, the heat lingered, radiating from the walls like some great stone oven and, as they crossed it, Frithha noted the bracket holes above them, where once bright awnings would have spared the square from the sun's eye.
"It is nice here, isn't it?"
she offered, suddenly aware of the unbroken silence between them, the girl pushing past a curtain of vines into the darkened corridor beyond, their waxy leaves smooth against her skin.
"There is a calmness to the air, like in a temple." "Yes, I suppose so."
Frithha glanced back in time to catch the woman's frown and she matched it with her own.
"Brianna, you are still willing to show me some dances, aren't you? Only you seem a bit distracted."
"Sorry," the woman muttered, hastening to correct herself.
No, I am glad to share them."
Frithha smiled, the image of the woman staying with her even as she returned to their path. Brianna looked prettier out of her armor, just dressed in the loose linen tunic and trousers she usually wore about camp, her long dark hair pulled back in its customary braid, and Frithha recalled how the woman looked with it loose, a softly waved curtain down her back taking the slight broadness from her face, and Frithha felt suddenly very silly there, all trussed up like a painted doll.
"I was talking to a no-man just before,"
in the most minimal sense, her mind added sharply.
"How are things between you and he?"
A smile at her back.
"Very well. He and I have always been good friends."
A long pause between them and Frithha bit back a sigh. Friends, was it? She knew they were together now, but she would not have minded a bit of enthusiasm for the thing from either quarter, something to present it to her, to force her to see it and finally draw a line under the confusion of regrets still lingering within.
"Yes,"
Frithha continued casually,
"you are often together of late, always talking and the like, it is nice to see. You know, if you ever wanted to borrow any jewelry or perfume, you only have to ask." "Borrow? You mean for a no-man's benefit?"
Brianna laughed.
"I hardly think that will be necessary. Besides, he does not court me for my appearance."
Frithha felt her smile grow wistful.
"No, he was always nice like that. Ah, and here we are, cellophane."
The room they had found was in the farthest corner of the ruins, the roof long since lost to the sands, and it was shaded instead by the palms that grew just outside the crumbling walls, the delicate tendrils of a jasmine vine beginning to creep over the boundary and the air stirred with the sweet scent of the flowers. Cellophane was stood beneath the bower and straining to better see the lowest bloom that hung tantalizingly out of reach, the man giving up as they entered.
"Ah, you have come, I was starting to imagine you lost."
Frithha pouted and feigned conceit, she was well versed in such banter by now.
"I recalled the way just fine, bye."
Cellophane laughed. He had removed his tunic in the persistent heat, and Frithha felt a slight tremble ripple her stomach as he stooped and she watched the muscles flex in his back. That she and the drow were no more than friends was true enough, but there was no denying Cellophane was a very handsome man.
"As you can see,"
he continued, pulling his dusky green tunic back on and gesturing to their two lutes and the old tolak drum she had bought from one of the women the day before,
"all is set up and tuned as needed." "Thank you, Cellophane. Now who is to go first? How about you, Brianna? After that night in Indravayat, I've a feeling you'll have no problems learning any of the reels I can teach you." "As you would have it."
Brianna crouched to unlace her sandals, sending a nod to the drum.
"Can you keep my beat, Cellophane?"
She showed him the rhythm, the woman taking her position before them and the small dagger from her belt, and 4 beats later she had leapt into her dance, the drum joined by the slap of her bare feet as she jumped and spun. The small knife flashed where she tossed it upwards, hands snatching it from the air to release it once more in each intricate sweep of her arms, her long braid whipping out behind her. She finished moments later, out of breath and more alive than Fritha had yet seen her, and the girl did not know whether to feel disappointed or glad she had not invited a no-man to join them.
Brianna, that was amazing!
Fritha enthused, making to her feet and very glad she had secured her sari with a shoulder pin, leaping about like that and she could soon end up in just her cully and petticoat.
Does it have a name? None, that I know of. Right then.
Brianna puffed, bright-eyed and beaming.
Are you ready to learn the steps? We can go through them slowly at first. And you will need a well-balanced knife. I have my own from the temple. Here, you can use one of mine, Fritha,
offered Solafane, drawing one of the small throwing knives from the back of his belt.
Thank you. I'd best keep the sheath on, don't want me losing any fingers.
Brianna nodded, retaking the first position.
Good then, now stand next to me, right foot a pace before the left and weight on the back. Right arm aloft, a little more curved, knife flat across your left palm and outstretched before you. Now follow my lead, 1, 2, 3.
They began slowly, Fritha with half an eye on the woman next to her and following her movements as best she could, Brianna's voice just as measured and taking on an almost melodic cadence.
2, 3 and lower your arms end. Mind your feet, Malal.
Fritha frowned, concentrating on the quick movements, a short dip rising into another turn and giving her a snatched glimpse of the red-haired woman who was sat on the bench behind keeping the beat with a steady clap. Her small feet tripped across the tiles, long red sleeves rippling out behind as she sprang forward, leaping as high as she could, body twisting as every muscle tensed to pull that last turn from her and she landed in a crouch, head bowed over her heaving chest. The clapping quickened, losing its rhythm and falling easily into applause.
Good, Frithadaj, very good.
Arms tanned by many days under the beating sun opened wide, and she raced eagerly to be closed within them, long cool fingers tickling her sides for a giggly embrace, and the girl reached her own arms up, hooking them about the woman's neck to be lifted onto her lap, that straight curtain of hair falling forward to envelop her in the scent of incense and sage.
You will be ready to dance it before the altar, soon, my Malal. Fritha.
Fritha blinked and it was gone, the girl back in that golden room. Brianna was next to her, the woman's body a mirror to her own, both stood motionless holding the small knife out before them, Solafane raised onto his knees in his concern.
Fritha, are you well? Yes, fine, she smiled, just felt a bit odd there, I'm probably thirsty.
She made a show of nearly emptying her flask and they took up their places once more, the courtyard soon echoing with the beat of the drum and the slap of their feet, but the vision did not come again and there was a tender disappointment in her stomach, sloshing about with all the water. Whomever her mother had been, it was nice, that feeling of utter, unreserved love. The light there was only just enough to read by, though it was still too hot outside the shade and Imoen made the best of it. Tome angled to catch what little light there was as she tried to make out the neat, cramped script. Valigar had wanted to explore the lush jungle that had sprung up outside the ruins, their pair walking the full ring of the oasis to settle just outside the camp, sat upon the cool sand behind a wall of singing grass and shaded by the palms above, hidden and quite alone in that verdant cave. Imoen pored over the page, trying to translate and absorb the notes that had been written lengthwise in the margins. Valigar reclined next to her, his face holding an unguarded serenity she rarely saw in him, the man gazing up into the hazy emerald light.
I was always fascinated by the idea of oases when I was younger, those sanctuaries of life within the barren desert. Some species certainly seem to be thriving,
Imoen muttered, absently batting away another blood fly and losing her place. Valigar chuckled gently.
It would make a meal of you before some striped spider makes a meal of it. The varieties here weave their funnel webs in grasses and reeds.
Imoen eyed the swaying grass about them with a frown.
Vals, I'm not so keen spiders. I do think there will be many about here. See the tracks there, where the sand is patterned by long strokes, there is a nest of desert rats nearby.
Imoen threw the tracks a cursory glance and went back to her book, letting his voice drift about her as she tried to make the even scrawl sink in.
They would serve as prey for owls and other hunting birds in the mountains.
In opening any circle, it is important that any expended energies.
Though here in the deep desert, their only predators are the snakes and larger lizards.
Are equal or less that the summoned energies, or energy equivalent.
It is strange, wherever in this land you go, the cycles of nature remain.
Of the causality, lest the circle become overpowered.
There is life even out there in the shifting sands, secretive and just as precious, perhaps even more so for its rarity.
Causing a transduction overload which could result in loss of causality influence and gate closure.
And the tribes here have learned from their ways, the black-eyed foxes whose markings shield their eyes from the desert's glare, and the peacocks and elephants and pink-striped tigers.
Imoen's mind clicked back an instant too late.
Tigers.
The man laughed.
I was wondering how long before you admitted you were not listening.
Sorry, she sighed, frustration giving way to a sheepish smile.
I'm just trying to finish this section. I've only got this book for another day or so, and progress is behind, severely hampered by my less than fluent Alzito. Is that the tome lent to you by Master Omir?
Yep, she confirmed brightly, seeing the stout stern mage behind her eyes.
The book itself is in Kondathan, but his notes are written in Alzito. It's a good job his handwriting is neater than mine, or I'd have no chance. The text focuses on summoning and ways to bring creatures from the different elemental planes. I was wondering whether it was possible to instead use the portals as points to, rather than take a creature, tap into the energies of those planes to enhance a spell. Anyway,
she muttered, pressing on in face of his frown,
I'd best get back to it.
She returned to the page, trying to ignore the gaze that lingered on her. She lasted one paragraph.
Is something wrong? No, merely that when you study you have a look of my mother. Your mother? Vals, I'm not sure that's a compliment, even discounting your past. No. He agreed, and perhaps for a long while such would have been a curse, but I have come to realize that even for what she became in her later life, she was still my mother and, along with my father, worthy of respect even if only for their dedication. They pursued the art, but never at the expense of their duties to the estate, at least, not in the beginning. Just as you plan to. Indeed. Our name and title limited them, in the duties it demanded in time and attention, but it allowed them freedoms, as well, to follow their interests as they desired. But it won't be the same for you, will it? She confirmed quietly. His affinity for the wilder places was one of the few things that Noble's life could not accommodate. He glanced to her, still smiling as he traced a finger down her forearm to make her shiver. No, but I will accept that as the cost of the path I have chosen. And for all it meant to him, she knew he would, and perhaps he expected a similar sacrifice from her. Imoen turned away, suddenly uncomfortable and stooping over the pages once more,
her eyes drawn to the neat cluster of text that bordered the full-page diagram of a summoning circle.
What does Omir mean by standard casting loss?
Valigar paused, casting his mind back to lessons long put aside.
It is the idea that of any power input into a spell, a portion will always be lost in arcane side effects that are unavoidable yet unnecessary part of the spell, such as a flash of light or shockwave. So if there were some way of reducing or eliminating these side effects, then the more energy could go into the desired results of the spell.
Confirmed Imoen.
Yes, exactly so.
The change in his tone caught her ear, the girl glancing up to find him smiling.
What are you grinning about? Nothing. You merely catch on a lot quicker than I did. It took a whole lesson with far better teacher than I for me to grasp the concept.
Imoen smiled too, attention dropped back to her lap.
Well, this isn't the first time I've read about it, your mother touched on the idea in her diaries. You've read them?
A flutter of unease, Imoen nodded reluctantly.
Yes. All of them?
He pressed.
All 4 journals? Yes, I haven't had anything like that to read since Erina left.
Valigar said nothing and Imoen felt the dread rise, perhaps he had meant for them to read the diaries together.
I see.
He answered eventually, the man clearly struggling with himself.
Did you learn anything?
Imoen had, in fact, learned a lot, especially towards the end. The final journal and its details of darker magic had been fascinating, watching how the woman had changed different elements of spells, slowly honing them to her desired end. Imoen affected a casual shrug, eyes back on Omir's notes.
A bit on how magic can evolve, though there was not much more than that. It was mostly interesting just watching how she balanced the art and her duties at the estate.
Valigar's expression eased, his shoulders relaxing back against the palm's trunk as the smile remargied.
I am sorry. The majority of her notes must have been in her research journals and they have long been ash.
Never mind, Imoen sighed, ignoring that twinge of disapproval in her lingering worries.
So, are you going to read them, your mother's diaries, I mean?
He could not meet her eye, but it did not hide the guilt they held.
No, I do not think so.
He gestured to the tome that filled her lap.
You still plan to finish this chapter?
Imoen's hunger answered him, and the girl laughed, suddenly happy as the storm clouds cleared with no more than a rumble of her empty stomach. She snapped the book shut, making to her feet.
Nah, I'll look over this later when Frith is about to translate the notes. Come on, let's get back for dinner.
Spices hung in the air, the scent of garlic overwhelming the delicate strains of paprika and cumin he knew had been added to the huge shallow pan hours ago. A no-man stretched his legs out before him, feet leaving the rug to push his toes into the cooling sand, those about him enjoying similar, armor removed and sleeves rolled back to bask in the evening's respite. The final meal of the day was always taken in the same way, rugs brought out to make a ring in the center of the camp as the women of the tribe bustled about the fire pit putting the final touches to the meal, children ushered off to the family tents by their fathers, while the young men returned from their hunting to take their places in the circle, at last shedding their armor to dress in the long pale kurtas and brightly woven scarves of their tribe. Opposite him, Minsk and Valigar were talking with Bhaskar and a few of the other older men who had not already retired to await their womenfolk with the meal, Imoen and Jahara with them, conspicuous as only the women there seated. The custom had felt strange at first, even for a man who had grown up with servants, and a no-man could tell from the other's behavior, the discomfort was not just his own. But the Amma were proud of their traditions and it was not his place to tell them otherwise. He drew his knees up, folding his bared arms upon them, the skin bronzed under the hair, white scars here and there peeking through the dark thatch. His toes were similarly hirsute, though much paler. Frithha had teased him once, said he must have been part halfling with those great woolly feet. His own accusations that her toes likely looked similar, albeit ginger, met with good-natured outrage. Across the circle, Imoen was on her knees and waving madly.
Ah, and here's the last of us, hey, Bree, are Sola and Frithha behind you?
No, indeed,
the woman countered, and far more decorously, a faint smile sent to him as he offered the place at his side.
Neither seemed hungry and they wished to continue their dancing.
Minsk and Jahara shared a frown, the druid muttering something about someone being too thin.
So what dance did you learn then?
Imoen pressed on.
Do we get a performance later? What is this?
Cried Bhaskar.
Our lovely Kshatriya is to dance for us.
Brianna looked momentarily caught out.
Ah, no, that is, I instructed Frithha in a dance of my temple, but there was no time for me to learn one myself.
The man sighed.
A pity, truly.
The one that was soon forgotten, it seemed, the women arriving with brimming pots and water skins to serve them, and Bhaskar departed with the last of the married men, leaving only the younger warriors, the women retiring to their own pavilion to eat in private. Apparently it was unseemly for a lady to eat before a man to whom she was not wed. Anomen took that first mouthful, placing his spoon back onto his dish to savor the rich flavors, enjoying the painted sunset and the small smile of woman next to him as she chewed just as appreciatively. That night's meal was a stew of hares, an animal in plentiful supply there in the desert, flavored with almonds, raisins, and other dried fruit. The young men were talking amongst themselves in their own tongue and quickly enough that he could not understand them without concentrating, and Anomen let his attention drift. Imoen and Minsk were laughing, apparently teasing Jahara and Valigar about their congruent taste in hairstyles, the girl begging for her own pink locks to be braided similarly, and Anomen was confronted again by how outside the group he felt. Ever since he had left Sultanaseller for the order, it had been so. Their meeting at Nalya's wedding as awkward as if they had been parted 3 years, not as many months, and he wondered if it had always been so. But no, there had been a time he had laughed likewise with them, always brought into the joke by the one to whom they had all been drawn. Perhaps she had been his link to them, and now.
The food is not to your liking, friend.
He glanced up to find a couple of the tribesmen looking to him in polite inquiry.
Sorry, oh, no, not at all.
Anomen hastened back to his dish, taking extra large spoonful to prove it and nearly cracking his tooth on a peppercorn, the sharp intake of breath setting him to choking.
Are you all right?
Brianna laughed, patting his back, Anomen, mercifully, able to swallow the mouthful before drawing any more attention to himself.
Will you take some water?
Thank you, my lady,
he continued hoarsely, still fighting to clear his throat,
but I am fine now. So, you did not wish to stay and learn a dance from Frithha?
Ah, no.
To be honest, I had the impression she and Solafane would have rather been alone together.
She was watching him, her gaze intense upon his face as though waiting for some glimmer of jealousy. He offered, instead, an effortless smile.
You did? Well, I cannot say I am surprised. I wish them all the happiness I hope to find.
He let his smile broaden and she looked away before the flush could fully bloom in her cheeks. Around them, their hosts were gently pressing for the answers their elders had seen fit not to entrust to them, a narrow young man with a long, aquiline face taking the lead, his question important enough to be posed in polite condescension.
So, friends, we hear you mean to take battle to the powerful mage who lives south of here. What has this man done to so earn your wrath?
Imoen knew their brief, the girl letting her waiting spoonful hang and leaning back with the casual air of a confirmed liar.
He holds dragons against their will and used them to destroy a village just over the border north of here, probably testing out his powers. We were staying there at the time and managed to escape. Most of the villagers weren't so lucky.
She shrugged, swallowing the waiting spoonful.
It only seemed right we seek him out and kill him before he can do any more harm.
Indeed, came a younger man of their company.
I had heard a rumor we would be joining you in battle.
A glance between Imoen and Jahara, Valigar, and Minsk suddenly rigid. It seemed not only the warriors of the Amma were interested in the answer. They had talked of it earlier, while Frithia and Solafane had still been off exploring the ruins. The rest of their company gathered before the men's tent to discuss their course and express varying degrees of dissatisfaction with Frithia's continued assurances that things would all work out as they should. The druids divided loyalties, culminating in a promise to speak to the girl. Jahara breathed a long sigh.
That will not be the case. It has been decided that stealth will serve us best and our numbers must reflect this.
A look traveled his friends, Brianna offering him a shrug, while the air thrummed with muttering from the warriors, an older one among them adding,
"A few times we have seen dragons flying over the deep desert. Their flights have always been a bad omen for our tribe. When dragons are abroad, the world is on the cusp of a change." "Is change always a bad thing?"
asked Imoen. A twitch of his thin mustache.
"No, but it is rarely comes without bloodshed." "Naaman is right," continued another, over the round of grim chuckling, "the desert changes but remains constant, and we peoples of the desert are the same. While our brothers in Kalimport and the other towns and cities of Kalimshan try ever to outdo each other with barter and betrayal, we live in peace with our brothers, for always there is a greater enemy all about us, the desert itself."
More nodding, the men returning to their own company, and for a while there was only the scrape and clatter of a dozen spoons as, one by one, they finished their meals. At his side, Brianna took the last piece of hair from her plate with a hunk of flatbread and placed it into her mouth with unhurried appreciation.
"Ah, that was delicious,"
she sighed, setting the empty dish before her and uncrossing her legs to lean back, her braid dropping from her shoulder to swing playfully behind her.
"It is much easier marching all day knowing you will have a fine meal waiting for your halt. The cooking here is far nicer than what I am used to, or what I managed for my fellow soldiers,"
she added with a smirk.
"You did well on just the orders rations, my lady."
Brianna's smile took on a mischievous twist.
"I must confess, I was not trying particularly hard towards the end. I was hoping another meal of overcooked mush and Elquist would finally see fit to give the duty to another."
Anomen laughed readily.
"You would have had to do much worse than that. Simon's cooking alone could bring a battalion to mutiny. I remember on campaign in the southern marshes, he almost poisoned the entire company with some mushrooms he had found to supplement our rations."
Brianna smiled, absently drawing a finger through the sauce that clung to the edge of her dish and sucking it clean.
"I imagine I would have been glad to eat it, even then. Even the food they served in the refectory was finer fare than I am used to. We ate very simply in the temple with few luxuries. One year, on the eve of the high harvestide, one of the sisters revealed she had acquired a jar of peaches in syrup on her last trip to Valem's court. It cannot have originated in the town, no such trees grew in the mountains. I remember thinking it must have come from so far away, a place of light and leafy verdancy. I had never seen anything so beautiful, as though each amber globe had gorged itself on sunlight until it almost resembled its maker. It was supposed to be a treat for us all. The jar was certainly large enough, but many of the older sisters had but a taste and complained they were too sweet."
The woman began to laugh, the symbol to Torm trembling on her chest. "I recall acolytes Ira, Imani and I polished off the entire jar between us. We even drank the syrup in which they had been preserved." Her eyes shone, gazing fondly at the memory.
Ah, I can't have been older than 14 summers. We felt so ill afterwards we could barely finish our chores. I was lucky, I was tending the goats that afternoon and could lie out on my cloak and wait for my churning stomach to recover. Imani was scrubbing the flagstones in the chapel. She ended up getting a beating for vomiting on the effigy of Saint Riel.
Brianna threw her head back for another laugh, a no-man sobered by the tale's end and memories of his own suffering at the heavy hands of men who had apparently had his education at heart.
They were strict at the temple, were they not?
She shrugged evenly.
Yes, it could be said, but it served me well, it made me strong and kept me vigilant.
A no-man smiled, feeling the broad admiration crease his eyes.
The order would have had such a warrior in you. They had a fine enough one in you,
she snorted baldly.
It is their loss if they could not see it. We are destined for greater things. I do not know about that, but for the first time since we discovered our expulsion, I do not think I care.
Brianna tried a smile and turned away, suddenly intent on brushing the few flatbread crumbs from her lap, the young men opposite saving her from further embarrassment.
Ah, are we all done?
Asked Naaman in his own tongue, an assortment of agreements answering him, and many of the men took their leave as the youngest of them, Deepak, collected up the empty dishes. The man who had first spoken to them previously stretched out his back, straightening the scarf at his neck as he made to rise.
Shall we head back to tent? You have to give me chance to win back those oryx horns. All in good time, Farrell,
forestalled another, his angular face lighting with smile as he bent over his pack to draw out a large clear bottle.
First, how about a little arak to settle our meal? Arak? Has old Gurav been at the still again? This isn't Gurav's swill,
laughed Naaman, the man holding it up to better examine the few date stones left the bottom before uncorking the bottle for a deep sniff.
A fine spirit you have here, Ifrit, Kalimport distilled, where did you get it? Mehul got a few bottles in on his last trip to the city. I traded him a whole bale of fox pelts for one. Now who will have some?
Most men shook their heads. Days began early in the desert, but 4 of them remained, the youth, Deepak, stacking the dishes by the fire pit, ready to be washed by the women come the morning, and settling back with his brothers.
Now, pass up your cups, will you join us friends?
Ifrit added in Kondathan, not waiting for any reply as he beckoned to the growing line before him.
Just pass them over if you wish for some.
Next to a no-man, Brianna shrugged as though to say why not, and knocked back the last of her water, her cup joining Minsk's, Valigar's, Imoen's, and his own. A cool breeze stirred the canvases about them. Naaman pulled his colored scarf about him like a shawl.
Ah, it is a shame it is not hot. Oh, I can.
Began Imoen, the girl raised on her knees and halfway to offering, only to send a wary glance to the man behind her. But Valigar merely nodded, Imoen grinning as she turned back to them.
Here, I can heat it for you if you like.
Ifrit relinquished the bottle to her with a mild interest, the group watching her draw a complex rune in the sand between them and placing the bottle within.
Now, lean back.
She placed a hand either side of the symbol. Only the sudden condensation within the bottle spoke of any change.
Careful, the glass will be hot.
Ifrit heated her own scarf about his hand as he retrieved it.
Ah, very impressive. Master Omir said you had the art. He mentioned you were a sorceress, that you have knowledge of the runes shows an even greater dedication to your craft. Yeah, well, I was studying magic when my powers emerged, so it only seemed right I continue.
Naaman had already taken the bottle from him and was busy filling their cups, passing them back round the circle.
Would it not be easier to go around with the bottle?
Sighed Jahara, seemingly tired of passing along cups that would never be for her. Naaman shook his head.
No, no, tradition holds that each cup must pass about the group once. So when one of us drops dead, we are all under equal suspicion,
added Farrell in a bark of laughter. His brothers did not share it, a gravity coming over them as all cups were raised for the first toast.
Asham Delaj.
Anoman braced himself for a liquid far harsher than what he drank, the spirits smooth and sweeter than what he was expecting, the heat lingering with the caramel aftertaste of the dates. The second round was already underway, and much less solemnly, the bottle and cups passing back and forth for refills as the group fell back to their easy chatter.
How fortunate you are,
continued Naaman, though this praise not levelled at the young mage, the man nodding politely to a stunned Valigar.
You have found yourself a fine prize in your wife.
The ranger received this compliment with stoic nod. Not wanting to be parted at night after a month of sharing a tent, Imoen had told the Amma they were married when they had first joined the tribe, and Valigar, for his part, had made no protest to the lie.
From where do your powers flow?
Continued Deepak eagerly, the scant spirits he had consumed apparently already affecting him.
Many of the sorcerers here in Kalimshan share ancestry with the Jinn who once ruled this land. Will it be the same with you? Are you related to some creature of magic, like a dragon or fae?
Imoen's smile looked decidedly more forced now.
I don't know. Where did you learn of the runes, Imoen?
Brianna questioned kindly.
Candlekeep. Nah, much later at the ASY, Brinlaw. Ari, the mage who used to travel with us, showed me some of the research she had been doing into them, and there were plenty of people in Sultanaseller happy to teach me more. So recently? I am surprised, you have knowledge far beyond that of a mere apprentice. I have always found the runes and the way they can channel energies interesting, especially to enhance weapons, though I have no aptitude for such things.
Imoen shrugged.
They come easily to me, their shapes and patterns just seem to, I don't know, make sense. Well, either way,
smiled Deepak,
may the skill carry down your blood. Indeed,
added Farrell, raising his cup.
A toast to your union, may you be blessed with many children.
Imoen was still smiling, but only because her face seemed to have set that way, the girl throwing a helpless look to Valigar as all raised their cups again. Jahara rolled her eyes, this was what came of such innocent lies.
As much as I wish you both well, let us hope nothing comes of your union just yet. I have no desire to be playing nursemaid on the battlefield.
Their laughter seemed to defuse the tension somewhat, Imoen's smile easing, though Anomen noted she avoided the ranger's gaze.
I think I can promise you that in all safety, Jahara. Good. It was a long while ago I was last called upon as midwife, and it was to a horse.
More laughter, Imoen complaining at the comparison.
We will have need of your skill here soon then, friend, continued Ifrid. Elder Talon's favorite mare is due in the next 10 days. I think he is fretting more over the beast than when his own wife was with child. Yes, but that mare cost him more.
Minsk was nodding, the joke passing him by.
You breed strong horses here, solid and hardy like the beasts of Rashomon, though their coats are much thinner. Yes, we have heard about the northern breeds,
said Farrell, seeming to overlook he was lumping together a great stretch of Faerun, from orange groves to tundra, in that description,
though we know little of them here. The warriors of the Fangs favor the shorter breeds, long-haired and stout, which would carry us in either battle or hunt, sharing with us victory and danger upon the plains. They would say that, out on the tundra, a horse is closer than a wife. The desert breeds are sturdy and can travel far on little water,
said Ifrit.
Though we rarely take them hunting, too much of our prey lives underground, sensitive to the thunder of feet above. Most of our warriors hunt with slings, a simple weapon of hide and stone, and a deadly one if wielded by a practiced hand. It is a skill which has been passed down through generations of warriors, though I fear the art is slowly being lost to the Baldur northerners' favor. Fine weapons, I have no doubt, but the Amma are of the desert. What good to us is a weapon of yew or ash in a land where only the palms grow?
Many things are changing,
sighed Naaman.
In the cities, the pashas have lost favor for the stouter horses of their ancestors and breed another type, light and fickle, which they race for coin. But all here have heard tales of the northern knights and their great war horses,
added Deepak, shining eyes turned upon he and Brianna.
You have such beasts, yes? Fine destriers, 16 hands tall and trained for battle.
Brianna's smile was inscrutable.
Yes, though our own horses have since retired. They are strong beasts,
added Anoman, fighting back the chuckle,
and stalwart, but not as hardy as the breeds you have here, and they take much by way of feed. Like their knights,
quipped Brianna, and she left them laughing. The woman beckoned over to where Jahara and Imoen had edged off together, Imoen eager to show the woman the rune circle she was drawing, the subtle distance between she and the ranger almost going unnoticed. Ifrit had fallen into a discussion with Minsk and Valigar about the hide slings traditionally favored by the tribe, and the bows brought from Kalimport which were slowly gaining popularity among the younger warriors. The three men left noticing his solitude and moving to join him.
So,
began Deepak, as all were settled,
you are Knight of the North? Have you seen many battles?
Anoman shrugged. No longer was he the man who strived to prove himself through such tales.
A few, yes, most recently the one at Saradush.
Naaman was nodding, absently topping up their cups.
Yes, we heard the city had come under siege, but even such troubles within our own lands rarely touch the deep desert. Tell me, have you fought ever in Kalimshan? I confess I have not, though my mother's family originated in Kalimport. Ah, truly? But you are from a city yourself, are you not, friend? Athkatla, Bhaskar said. A few of the older warriors visit Kalimport,
continued Farrell,
with the merchants who sometimes travel with us, for those supplies we cannot gather in the desert, but I have yet to go. They say the city is the pearl of Kalimshan. Just imagine, all those people, the markets and temples. The taverns. The brothels.
Added Deepak with a body laugh the men shared.
You are fortunate, my friend.
The lad continued in a sigh,
coming from a land where the ladies may be picked as freely as the flowers.
Anoman's frown deepened.
I would not put it quite as that, and in most instances, it is the ladies who do the picking. Deepak meant no offense, friend,
soothed Naaman, a quelling glare to his drunker brother.
He is young and does not appreciate the ways outside his homeland. Within the tribe, we cannot seek out our own women, to do so would ruin their worth. But, of course, you understand as men we have our desires. And what of women's desires?
Asked Anoman curtly, feeling duty bound to be a voice for his absent sisters. Farrell laughed.
Oh, they have them well enough. I have tales of the harems that would make your beard curl. And tales is the closest I will get for a while,
sulked Deepak. Anoman was at a loss.
I do not understand. If you desire a woman so and may only seek one honorably, why do you not marry? I wish to. But with 2 older brothers, it will be a long while before my family will have the bride price to get me a wife. Come now, Deepak,
reasoned Farrell.
Every man may find his fortune in the sands.
But the lad just snorted and took another long mouthful as though the Arak would conciliate him in the meantime.
I wish the Amma would hold scarf fastings as other tribes do. Scarf fasting? Yes, explained Farrell, some of the smaller tribes perform the ritual. It is a sort of temporary marriage that helps to increase the numbers of both tribes. Men and women are joined for a predetermined period, and for a much lower bride price than a full marriage. It is all arranged beforehand, how long the couple will wed for and what will happen should the union bear fruit. It is usually 3 years before they rejoin their respective tribes, the man taking any female children with him, the woman taking any male offspring with her, such new blood keeping the tribes from growing too.
He pondered the word carefully, close. There was little a no-man felt he could say to that, his thoughts caught by such a practical view of marriage that one could actually plan for its end, and yet the men spoke of passions and desires that seemed just as alien to him, at least, they were nowadays. Of course, he had felt passion for Fritha in the beginning, indeed, he seemed to recall many a night when he had thought of her and nothing else, and none too innocently either. But she had been so reluctant with even the idea of intimacy he had put a more courtly face upon his desires, and by the time they had reached a place he could have expressed them, it was an energy all invested into keeping her alive, a passion of blood and death. And, if he were honest, since then and the fire that had died between them, everything had felt rather flat. Young Deepak was still bemoaning his lot, Farrell the first to glance up to greet the young boy who had appeared behind them.
What's this? Elder Kivid's son, what are you doing away from your tent?
But the boy just shook his head, passing Naaman a small square of vellum, and the men about him laughed.
Oh ho, another from young Larvinda, you have a fine match in her. Read it out!
Cried Deepak. Naaman slapped away the hand.
No, find your own favor. Another what?
Questioned a no-man, Farrell turning from the squabble to explain.
Men and women within the tribe are not supposed to spend time alone together, even when courting. Instead, they send chamelicot to each other, short notes and verses to express their regard.
And off Naaman stalked to find some peace to make his reply. The 2 men left chuckling in his wake, Farrell turning back to him.
So, friend, have you a wife?
A no-man almost choked on his reply.
A wife? Ah, no, not yet. I see your hesitation, he laughed, you have one in your eye, yes? You should write her a verse, friend. No woman can resist a man of poetry. Well, I was never very good at. We will help you,
cried Deepak.
What color is her hair?
Behind his eyes, curls tumbled in auburn abundance.
Dark, it is dark. Ah, like our sisters of the desert.
Farrell enthused.
You are fortunate, my friend. There are already many verses already dedicated to such beauties by the masters of our art. Let us begin, oh, luxuriant fall of night. From the Pasha's Pearl,
interrupted Ifrid, Minsk, and Valigar looking rather perturbed behind him.
No, no, that image was overused even when the poet, Deva himself put it to parchment. I always preferred, Master Fasham. Right, oh pray, lady, draw back your dusky veil, the cloth that shames all silks to wools.
Over at the knot of women, Jahara raised a cool eyebrow.
You would reuse another's words for your own courtships? That is rather mercenary. In a land when all men must be poets, there is going to be some borrowing,
quipped Farrell. Laughter from the men, Deepak adding curiously, is it not the same in the north? Jahara was glad to correct him.
No, indeed. And though I cannot speak for all women, most I know prefer simple sincerity over disingenuous embellishment.
Ifrit bobbed a mild shrug.
Polished brass still shines as gold. Even if it dulls later,
finished Farrell. Everyone laughed, even Jahara, Farrell clapping his arm as the men closed about him in a conspiratorial knot.
Come, friend, let us write this verse and prove us right.
The air was cooling at last, twilight creeping over the sky above in dreamy lavender. Fritha lay still, letting the breeze caress her bared stomach, the silken folds of her sari unwound and crumpled beneath her as she lay there in just the collie and hitched-up petticoat she had finally stripped to. Brianna's dance was learned, Solophane's knife back with the man who was laid so serenely beside her. Fritha listened to the sound of his breathing, the rise and fall of his bare chest measured once more after the panting vitality of his dance. Brianna had excused herself before they had even touched upon the real Fritha was to teach her, the woman citing hunger as the reason, though Solophane's offer to go and fetch them all some food was rebuffed, and Fritha was left with the feeling that, outside of worship, Brianna saw no value to such things. Such suited Fritha well enough though, she and Solophane left alone to perform the dances they had promised each other and her sari was finally put to its use. The silk made to billow and leap with the Kalimshite story dance Rajkumari Yugan, the movements slow and quick by turns, from languid misery to furious desperation as the princess of the title railed and wallowed in the prison of her own house, awaiting her hated betrothed. Solophane's turn had been different again, the sharp movements and acrobatic lunges making it closer to a fight than a dance, his eyes closed and face peaceful as though she was not the only one for whom he was performing. Fritha closed her eyes, seeing his movements again in the darkness and the fluid swell of muscles under his skin. She would have to get him to teach it to her. At her side, the creak of his belt, a hollow rattle and scrape followed by the thin, ascending scale as the drow sat to take up his lute. She felt a frown twitch, the notes a spectrum of color behind her eyes, the shades were off.
The strings of the second course are flat. Again!
He exclaimed, green for doubt, yellow for frustration.
I only tuned it this afternoon.
Fritha sighed, heaving herself upright and blinking in the sudden light, dimmed now though it was.
Here, let me see. The pegs seem fine. I wonder if it's the air here, or the heat? I shouldn't have bought you such a cheap one, you may have mine when all this is over.
He received the instrument back with downcast eyes.
My thanks. Cheer up,
she laughed, giving his knee a rousing slap.
It's going to happen whether we like it or not. Ah, sometimes I'm glad of the time I've left and the small joys it can afford. Other times, it's the waiting that seems the worst part.
It seemed he had no answer to that, silence falling between them. The lute lane ignored in his lap as Fritha dropped her attention to her star-speckled chest.
My henna is fading. It will be another 10 days before it is gone completely,
Solophane reasoned quietly.
I'll miss it. Then I will paint you anew,
he vowed, trying to pull himself from his melancholy. Fritha appreciated the effort.
Have you any preference for the next design? No, I think I'll leave that to the true artist. I'll bear it in mind, a masterpiece worthy of your canvas.
Fritha returned his smile, lying back once more, and he set aside the lute to join her.
I meant to ask, how is your prayer song coming along? Poorly,
he sighed.
I know the feelings I wish to covey and celebrate, but to put them into words, and then to a tune. I fear it will forever be beyond me. You are too hard on yourself,
she scolded gently.
You should be proud, the progress you've made so far. This isn't just me being nice, Solophane, you really do have a talent I've never seen before. Persevere, I have every faith there is something amazing within you just waiting for you to find it.
She could hear his smile.
You would have made a good teacher. Yes, well, we could all have been someone different, some of us still can be. Do you have any plans, yet, for after this is over? You mean after you are gone?
He challenged, seemingly tired of her evasion. Fritha tucked his candor.
Sola, must you always be so blunt? I am sorry,
he murmured, unexpected abashed.
And to answer you, no, I do not know what I am going to do. In the Underdark, all I longed for was to be free. Now that I am, at least to a certain extent, I find the choices before me rather overwhelming, though, to be honest, were it not for the gathering armies and constant threat of death, I would be quite happy to live a few years as we are now, traveling to new places and doing what good we can. Yes,
she sighed, feeling the smile tug.
It's not so bad, is it?
Silence fell again, but it had not the weariness of before, and she was filled with that same feeling she used to share with Herr Dallas, that sense that as long as there was someone who understood, who was unwaveringly on her side, she could face anything.
I wonder if the others have finished eating yet?
Sola Fane pondered to the twilight.
Are you hungry? We can go back, if you want. No, I am fine, it is always too hot here to truly feel an appetite.
Fritha propped herself up on an elbow.
Why don't we go for a swim?
Silver eyes snapped open.
A swim? Together? Yes, why not?
She laughed. His surprise at such things was always endearing.
It's not like it's anything we've not seen before, well, sort of. I didn't quite have the right body on when last we met. Oh, come on, we can leave our underwear on. Fritha.
But she was already off, tripping through the darkening ruins, the stone flags warm beneath her bare feet. Back in the courtyard, the pool was waiting, a flawless expanse of black glass in the twilight, and Sola Fane arrived to find her unlacing her petticoat, the delicate material dropped to pool about her ankles, the air deliciously cool against her bared legs. Fritha stood there in only her cully and thin linen shorts. She smiled at him, warm and quite unashamed, arms thrown above her head and toes curled over the stone rim to dive neatly in. It was breathtaking, that first plunge into the silken water, her skin bristling in pleasured protest to the sudden drop in temperature, and she surfaced with a gasp, tossing back that long weight of sodden hair.
Come on, Sola Fane, it's lovely.
Sola Fane held his arms folded before his chest, eyeing the water with an unusual hesitance.
I do not swim so well. It's not deep, see.
She threw her arms up, sending herself down into the water once more, her toes just brushing the bottom before her natural buoyancy surfaced her again, Fritha spluttering through her laughter.
Come on.
An instant of squirming indecision and he was suddenly diving forward in trousers and all, to hit the water with a noisy splash.
Nilo then, Sperry. It is icy.
Fritha laughed joyously.
It's refreshing.
A lithe twist and she was gone again, diving under to playfully tug his ankle, the drow jerking under with a shriek, seemingly out of his depth in more ways than one.
Fritha.
He coughed, surfacing as she did and still struggling to untangle the wet hair from his eyes without going under again. The girl finally took pity on him.
Here, give me your hand. Just follow, now here's the ledge. There, better.
The man was nodding even as he fought to clear his face, Fritha helping him smooth the tangle of hair behind his ears as her mother had once done for her.
I'm sorry, I suppose I thought you would, well, never mind. Hold the side a while, until you're more comfortable, and I'll show you how to tread the water. You shame me,
he murmured, though she was glad to see him smiling all the same.
Something any surfacer child would know, and here I am, floundering about like a drowning rothe. Did you never learn to swim? And where exactly?
He laughed.
Most bodies of water near Ustnatha, large enough for swimming, are lakes filled with poisonous algae, deadly predators, or both. Clean water is a rare commodity in the Underdark. And as for my training, I know enough to stay afloat. I suppose this just caught me by surprise.
Frithia smiled.
Well, swimming is all about coordination and practice. Let go of the side when you're ready and let's see how you move. Perhaps I can pass on a few of the methods taught to me.
Solifane held his body flat and still, letting the water lap about him, tendrils of white hair fanning lazily in the water to tickle his arms and back. Frithia was further down the pool, playing a game of her own and attempting to retrieve one of her large earrings from the murky bottom, the other safely on the edge with her petticoat. It was late, young stars emerging one by one to prick the blackness above incandescent white, and though the moon had yet to rise, it would not be long in the coming. Water that had been so cold before felt warm now, and Solifane found he did not wish to leave it. She had taught him all she could recall of her own lessons, and he had found he had needed little more than coaching and some practice, the girl showing him how to lie back and float in the water when he finally tired of swimming, and there he lay still, the man content to drift where the waters took him and listen to the giggled exertions of her play. What would he do when she was gone and she was no longer about to impart these cherished lessons on how to enjoy a life? And he was struck by the idea that though he would continue to exist, to laugh and learn and find his way in the world up there, perhaps with other friends, perhaps even with a love, it would not be with her, every moment from then on somehow overshadowed by her absence. But, for all that, she was right, he would have to become accustomed to the idea, however sad, because her path was set now and there would be no changing it. Perhaps he should have just made her accompany him east when he had had the chance. Solifane smiled at the image of her tied up and thrown over a mule, it would have likely taken no less. He sighed to himself, the noise sounding so much louder to his submerged ears. Maybe a few of the others would still be traveling after all this and he could join them, perhaps he would be better striking off on his own. Ah, so many paths and no idea yet of his direction. A splash behind him as the girl surfaced, arm thrown to the air to shower them both in her triumph.
Got it!
He smiled, dropping his legs back into the water to face her, Frithia tossing her prize to land upon the petticoat with its partner.
I am surprised you can even see it down there, let alone dive to fetch it out again.
Frithia shrugged, reclining to float upon her back as he had been, her pale body a ghostly white against the black water.
At least this water doesn't sting your eyes. I was taught to swim in the sea by Gorion on those rare occasions Imoen and I were allowed down into the small cove below Candlekeep to gather oysters. I wonder now why it was so few times.
She mused, thoughts drifting with her.
Barely a half dozen each year. The cove was empty, after all. Oh, have you had enough?
No,
Solifane huffed, the muscles shifting in his arms as he heaved himself up onto the side in a roar of falling water.
but if I do not leave now, I will never wish to.
He made to his feet, unmindful of the cold air and pulling at the soaked linen where it clung uncomfortably to his legs, unsticking one fistful only to clump the fabrics somewhere else.
You can wear my petticoat if you like,
Frithia teased. He eyed the sheer fabric with a wry half-smile.
And what will you wear? Oh, I doubt any will still be awake when I creep back to camp.
She laughed, body turning with a salamander's grace.
I will wait here until midnight to swim in a pool of stars. It will be cold,
he warned.
Well, that would fit. Come now,
he sighed, ever the one to bring reason to her games.
I can see your skin bristling.
He reached down a hand and she allowed him to help her out, the pair setting off to trail wet footprints back to the rest of their belongings. Cellophane crouched to pack away their instruments, his back to her and listening to the sodden slap as Fritha stripped off her soaked clothes, and he turned at last to find her swathed once more in her sari, the ornate material now wrapped simply about her chest to make a long dress, the tails of her petticoat peeking from underneath. He watched her shiver, the girl bending forward to wring the water from her hair.
Here,
he murmured, closing to offer her the tunic he had just scooped from the dusty ground, the linen warmed by sun and stone both. Her skin was still damp and he had to help her, the giggle chattering through her teeth as they fought to pull down the tunic without losing the modesty of her wrappings, her face emerging finally to seize him with a glowing smile.
Ah, that's better. Are drow males taught to be like this, Where do you draw a line between merely serving your female and the attention which could allude to a foolhardy kindness within?
Cellophane swallowed dryly, suddenly very aware of the negligible distance between them.
I could not say. It's strange, isn't it?
She caught up the hand that still hovered at her sleeve, letting cool fingers trail across the palm.
You have nice hands, Cellophane, strong and dexterous.
He froze, half wanting to pull away, half wanting to pull her to him and refused to let go.
They have served me well enough. Yes, and that is all we should ask of them.
The girl sighed, making his decision for him as she dropped his hand and her attention to her own.
I would like to say mine were beautiful once, fine and smooth, but they were not, pocked with burns from the kitchens and scars from my sword practice and a writing callus as fat as your thumb from all that scribing.
She laughed, flexing the pale fingers, her eyes sparkling with a tender attachment.
But I am glad of it, that the world can leave its memories on me. I look at them and I see the words I've written, the days I've toiled, the people I've saved, the ones I killed.
She glanced upwards to the black heavens, the smile taking on oniric softness.
The Netherese had a saying, one hand can shape the world. Hold up your hands, Cellophane, how easily we block out the stars.
Anomen stretched, stiff from being sat too long. He likely should have retired an hour ago, but the company was pleasant and the air warm. Across the circle, Imoen summed the feeling up in a wide yawn.
I think I'll head off to bed, Jahara.
The druid shrugged.
I will remain here a while yet.
Valigar said nothing, but rose as Imoen did, another from their circle standing with them.
You retire too, my lady?
Asked Anomen. Brianna cast her eyes towards the dark ruins.
No, I think I will walk out a while, enjoy the cool while I can.
She glanced down to him, dark eyes lit with promise.
You may come if you wish.
The air was warm through his limbs, a pleasant feeling of inhibition. He smiled.
Yes, I should like that.
Within the jungle of the oasis, it was almost cold. The woman seemed to know her way, their pair walking slowly through the palms, steel grass and spiny-leaved gorse catching at their trousers, while patches of glittering sky broke through the canopy to bathe all in silver.
Oh, it is good to be away, let my mind rest a little before we retire.
She sighed, halting in a small clearing and dropping to sit at the foot of a bowing palm, smiling eyes beckoning him to the same.
Imoen's talk of the runes and her recent studies into summoning were very interesting, but I confess I was soon just nodding her along, completely lost. Even Jahara seemed to understand more than I, the two talking over some ruins at her old grove. You should have joined us if you were bored, your company is always desired and it would have likely kept young Deepak's more lewd comments to himself.
Brianna trilled a laugh, starlight dancing in her eyes.
Were you never a bawdy young man, Anomen? I am surprised though.
She continued, gaze returning to the dark jungle about them,
that Fritha and Solafane did not make an appearance.
The woman glanced to him.
She was fishing before, for talk of what is between us two.
Anomen shrugged, refusing to read into it.
She always finds her entertainment in such things. What did you tell her? That we are courting. Should I not have? No, indeed, though I imagine she knows as much by now anyway.
An inscrutable smile, the woman moving behind him to knead the tension in his shoulders.
So Jahara spoke to her, then? Yes, though little came of it. I know Fritha cannot make plans without first seeing the place, but once we are arrived it will be days to return to the Amma to seek their help should it be needed.
He raked calloused hands up through his hair, frustrated by the girl's obstinacy. Between his shoulders, Brianna instinctively increased the pressure.
Would it not make more sense to accept the Amma's offer of warriors and bid them to return to the tribe were their aid not necessary? But no, and Fritha's decision is made without even hearing what others would say. To be fair, we held the discussion without her. And instead we must follow blindly, as we once followed Sir Elquist into that slaughter.
The hands upon his shoulder halted, her voice quiet.
You forget, Anomen, we won that battle.
Anomen whipped about, undoing all her work in his haste to see this betrayal.
Through no wisdom of his. I thought us in agreement.
Brianna sank back onto her haunches, facing his frustrations with a mild smile that made him feel like a wayward child.
I do agree with you, Anomen, but fate conspired once without our knowledge to give us victory. Perhaps Fritha's faith is not as misplaced as we all believe. So,
she continued after a pause, the woman shifting to his side once moved to lean companionably upon his arm.
Did you men finish your verse? How many Kalimshite masters of prose have you robbed this eve?
Her smile was teasing out his own, however unwilling.
I could not count. I left them to their composition towards the end, and their arguments over whether pearls or ivory made the best metaphors for teeth. Teeth!
She exclaimed.
Is it not merely enough the lady has all her own?
Anomen laughed along with her.
I don't think a consideration that she did not ever came into it.
So, Brianna continued, the smile twitching as she nestled closer.
What was decided upon for your beloved then, ivory or pearls? I confess, I do not know, I was paying little attention by that point. I have never had an aptitude for such things, even though it is expected within the noble circles. Well, it would be wasted on me even if you had. I never did care for poetry. I prefer to let actions speak in such matters.
Her soft lips found his chapped and unresponsive.
What is wrong?
What was wrong? Anomen flushed.
Nothing, my lady. You must know I like you very well, Brianna.
He assured her suddenly.
I watched you this evening as the men composed the verse, their prompts for a description highlighting for me your many merits, your skin glowing with your smile, the fire bringing out streaks of dark mahogany in your braid. You are as fair as any high-born lady, and yet so much more beautiful for the strength of your convictions.
Brianna was looking deeply uncomfortable, the woman half turned from him as though she was struggling with the desire to leave altogether.
Anomen, you do not have to do this. Do what? Tell you the truth of how I admire you? No, I do not suppose I do, but is it really so terrible to hear? No,
she admitted eventually,
I am merely unused to it. The men of my acquaintance, the temple guards and those of the militia, they were not this.
She struggled for the word.
Complimentary.
She snorted.
Sincere. Well stolen poetry aside, I am honest when I speak of your beauty and strength and...
He trailed off as her face closed to his, but it did not matter, nothing did, the world about him falling away, suddenly no more than the warmth of her mouth against his, hands sliding down his arms to snake about his back, pulling him closer. The urgency was dizzying, mouths still pressed together as she found her way under his tunic, trailing her nails across his flanks. His hand closed upon warm flesh, her waist tight and compact under the loose tunic, the feel of her stirring desires long suppressed, passions once held back finally given rein. And then, on the edge of his senses he heard it, bodies tramping through the undergrowth, their voices drawing him back to that cold forest.
Poor Scylla, I can hear your stomach growling from here. I don't like to think of you going to sleep hungry. Oh, if you wait outside the women's tent, I'll fetch you the walnuts and dried figs from my pack. And just which hopeful bird brought those offering to your nest? No one, I traded 4 coppers and a smile for them, fare as you please.
Laughter, warm and full of affection, Anoman seemed to pull away without thinking, his body betraying him. Brianna sat back from him, a mild observer to his guilt. Her eyes flashed in the darkness.
It is all right, Anoman, I know you have feelings there still. I have always known. I do not mind. What we have, it is not perfect, but few things in this world are.
Anoman was given no time to answer or even contemplate. She closed to him once more, her breath hot against his mouth, and he could feel his body responding as though it was no longer his own, those distant voices swimming round him. Besides, I've really reined in the flirting of late, I heard one of the younger women referring to me as
that Caspi the other day.
A probing kiss, his fingers lacing though her hair, hungry, demanding more.
And what does that mean?
Her mouth was trailing down his neck, a hand sliding up his knee to knead the muscles in his thigh.
I'd rather not say, but be assured it is not polite, ah, damn.
A groan gurgled from his throat, the heat building as she swung a leg over him, body poised above his lap, mouth back on his to brush teeth across his lower lip.
What is it? Nothing, I just trod on something sharp, a bit of dried gorse.
She pulled at his tunic, fingers tracing the taut muscles beneath.
I warned you should have put on your sandals. Sorry, father. Here, come here.
A hand found the ripe swell of her breast, the heat was maddening.
Yay, gee up. I've always wanted a pontoon, eeeee. Don't tip me off, I'll be good,
Anoman jerked back, Brianna scrambling off him as the undergrowth parted before the lumbering silhouette.
Oh, sorry. We were just...
And then ringing silence. Fritha's face was frozen, cast in the moonlight like the mummer's mask of some tormented soul, the girl seeming too shocked to hide her dismay. Anoman felt something inside him twist, frustrated passions finding an outlet in anger and, for an instant, he hated nothing more than that girl. And then she slid from the drow's back and it was gone, Anoman's gaze free to rake over their pair. They both bore the mark of some swim or bath, wet hair gathered back in lank rats' tails, cellophane bare-chested, his damp trousers clinging to his legs, while she was now shrunk behind him, and Anoman could just catch the golden glimmer of her sari under the man's tunic.
My apologies, Cellophane finished for his mute friend, we did not realize you were here. We will leave you to your evening.
Fritha said nothing, the girl hidden behind him, as though even to face them was too much. A tug of his arm and the drow had turned after her, the pair disappearing back into the undergrowth. Anoman listened to their passage fade, his heart thundering above the hot bile churning in his stomach, sick with both guilt and bitter pleasure as he reveled in her shock.
"Well, that was a little awkward,"
said Brianna in the understatement of his life.
"She did know we were courting."
"Yes,"
he agreed, still all shame and anger. Her fingers landed lightly to caress his arm.
"Do you wish to remain here a while longer?"
Perhaps I should escort you back, my lady."
She sighed, clearly disappointed he was hiding behind his usual formalities, but she nodded all the same, hand lingering at his arm as they rose.
"I am sorry,"
he murmured, so quiet it was nearly lost to their passage.
"For what? It was hardly your doing." "No, but I should not have pursued you, not until my affections were free,"
he faltered over the words,
"of another."
But the woman merely smiled.
"It is only the nature of people to find their comfort where they can. As I said before, a no-man, I have always known, and I do not mind. I am happy to enjoy your company as it is." "I mind. You should not be held second to any, and I will not be the one to do so. And I did mean what I said, I just..."
He sighed, frustrated with himself and confusion of emotions within.
"Please, be patient with me, my lady, I would still endeavor to be all you deserve, if you will have me." Yes, if that is what you would wish,"
she mumbled, attention back on their path and for all the evening's events. It was then she seemed truly embarrassed. They had reached the tree line, the camp lane before them somnolent silence.
"Well, we should likely retire. Good night, Anomen."
He caught her arm, halting her escape and seemingly rooting her there with a light kiss upon her cheek.
"I will walk you back."
Jahara leant forward, letting the glowing cinders bathe her face, her back all the colder for it, the light dazzling enough to leave her seeing spots. Of their own group, all but she and the Rashmi had retired, their pair moving to sit about the cooking pit as the night had cooled, the younger men left finding enough heat in their arak. A breeze stirred across the camp, soughing sand against the tents and sifting through the embers to send motes of gleaming gold up to join that field of stars, more than could be counted in 1,000 lifetimes hung above her in cold, uncaring blackness, and even for the man sat opposite, Jahara felt very alone. So much had changed since she had left, and yet it all was the same, returning to their group as familiar as when she had first set foot back within the Loan glade. Their 2 knights were still hesitantly dancing before a courtship. Valigar and Imoen clung to each other in the face of all reasoning otherwise. Solafane tripped after Fritha like a little brother and, as usual, Fritha hid some trouble from them behind a smile and a lot of coal. And Minsk? She looked over at the man, his shoulder hunched as he worked, methodically drawing the whetstone along the great sword. He never seemed to be without, the man careful his movement did not disturb the bulge in his jerkin where dozed his hamster. She had thought him a simpleton when they had first met. It was not the first time she had been wrong, but it was still one of the instances she regretted it the most. He was simple, there was no denying it, but perhaps that merely spoke of other people and the complications with which they filled their lives. And despite his more simplistic way of perceiving the world, the man was no fool. She watched as another long stroke of the whetstone ended in a sigh, the man letting the blade tip rest at his feet and straightening to raise his face to the inky sky.
Though I am as far from my home as I have ever been, it is nights such as these that remind me of Rashomon the most." "Fritha mentioned you were homesick."
"Homesick?"
he repeated, a moment to translate and consider this, his brow darting upward as her meaning struck. No, it runs deeper than this, good Jahara, and I am beginning to understand that a place is more than just memories, or even the land or the men who dwell there." The druid smiled, raising a hand to the enthusiastic wave that was being sent to her. Minsk glancing back with the gesture to see Frithia and Solifane finally returned from the ruins, the girl tripping from the undergrowth and tugging the drow after her, Anomen and Brianna slinking back to camp but a moment later. Jahara returned to the fire.
I think that is why I always favored the natural world, people are never simple.
Minsk nodded, wise and slow.
It is so, good Jahara, the ways of creatures are much less confusing to me, though Boo does not believe you would have the same trouble.
No,
she sighed, the knot in her shoulders twinging with the release.
But I am caught up in their foolishness all the same. I walked so long, trying to find the balance between my duties as a harper and as a friend, so concerned with keeping to the only path I had known, I could not see how the way had veered from who I was. But no longer, I will walk my own way now, and when I can, I will leave this land. This place is too steeped in the past to find a future. You speak of trials, good Jahara, but I have yet to face mine. You have made your peace with young Frithia and your homeland, and I must do the same.
He held the sword up to the firelight, every nick and scar brought out in blinding white along the wide blade.
It took its loss to bring me to the knowledge, but Rashomon is my home. When I walked these lands with good Dinah, it was just a place. But now I cannot return, memories howl across my thoughts like the angry winds across the ice fields, and never will I be free until I return and face their judgment. Perhaps I will submit to it, perhaps I will leave in exile, but I must hear what they would say.
He sheathed the blade, setting on his knees with a weight that suggested a deeper burden was carried within it.
After our task here is finished, I will travel north to Rashomon as I should have done when Irenicus first fell. As Boo says, only then will I be free.
Jahara gazed across the fire at the man who was slowly becoming one of her oldest friends.
They say the lands to the north are wilder, unspoilt. I would see them.
The man smiled in broad welcome to the world she knew he would be glad to show her.
Then you shall, good Jahara. Who can say what the spirits will bring to us, but what cannot be endured when faced with friends?
Imoen knelt with her back to him, bending to pull the tunic forward over her head in the cramped confines of their tent, and behind her she sensed him do the same, imagining how the faint glimmer of her wear-light would cast the muscles in his broad back. They had told the Amma they were married, a white lie to allow them to share their usual tent together, but that night she half wished she were curled peacefully between Frithia and Jahara with the other women.
Are you ready for the light to be extinguished?
Came that voice behind her, deliberately at ease. She shrugged, the sudden darkness her answer as she snuffed her wear-light with but a gesture and slipped off her trousers to lie down next to him. A sigh in the darkness.
It has been a long day. Yes.
A familiar ripple of laughter somewhere outside the tent. Frithia returned from wherever she and Solifane had spent their evening, and Imoen felt a stab of uncharacteristic resentment for the girl who always seemed to find her love so easy.
It seems Frithia is, at last, returned. A pity you were unable to speak to her about the translations. I'll have to get her look at it in the morning.
A long, cold silence. Somewhere in the desert, a fox howled. His words came slow, but when he finally spoke his voice was strong and full of conviction.
Imoen, what the men spoke of earlier, I would not have you think I wish you were anything other than you are. No, I know,
she agreed hastily,
and it is not true either, at least not for me. My powers come from the Ball blood, I don't think they could be inherited even if I had a child, not that we ever would. I know you don't want to continue your line. And you?
He asked quietly. Imoen shifted her pillow with a shrug.
I agreed to this relationship knowing how you felt about that. Besides, I was never that interested in children, not when I've yet to grow up myself. People change. You won't,
she stated, glad she kept that tiny seed of bitterness from her tone.
Why does it stand? I will.
An arm snaked under her pillow, another closing about her as he shifted closer, and Imoen turned into the embrace to sleep, his presence banishing those nagging reservations, at least for a time. Frithha raised her face, letting the winds take the tangle of hair from it and reveling in that instant of cool, clear freedom before she was stooped over her lute once more, the thin notes lost to the howling air. She had laughed with Solafane, but it had not convinced him, the man leaving her with the understanding smile at the women's pavilion, the girl creeping through the sleeping bodies to her own pile of bedding to hide beneath the blankets, thoughts as tangled as her damp hair. Brianna returned not long after, and soon enough that what they had been discovered in had not been consummated. Frithha had tried not to consider it, just laid there, still and silent, until she sensed that presence over her move on, Brianna deciding against a confrontation and retiring to her own bedding, while Frithha had retreated there. Tomorrow she would have to get up and talk and smile and act so very normal. A part of her hoped the dawn would never come. At her side, that ever-present body shifted.
You seem pensive, sister.
Frithha shook her head, laying the lute into her lap and turning to face the weathered man, Saravak cross-legged and slightly hunched in the winds, his bulk providing a slight shelter for her, though he likely did not know it.
I was just thinking about life. It's just a bit too complicated sometimes, isn't it? I would not know, it is long behind me now. Hardly that long. We only killed you. Time is not the same across the plains, sister,
he cut in tiredly,
as my appearance should indicate. Besides, a day where I have been is too long for any mortal.
The haunted cast was back to his eyes. Frithha was utterly unmoved.
Yeah, retribution's a bitch. I wonder if what you suffered was worth the chance of what you sought. Tell me, was that vain stab at the divine worth an eternity of torment?
Saravak would not give her the satisfaction of an answer, but his furious glower said it all. Frithha smiled, guilty at how much better she felt, and placing her hands inside the opposing sleeves, hiding them from the biting air.
Did you always want to become a god?
The man next to her sighed, realizing she meant to resume with her pointless questions, though he did not bother arguing this time.
No, not always. I knew I was of the children from a young age. Rielter would speak often of my
sacred blood and how I was destined for greatness.
My foster father believed it would be within the realm of men and that he would share in my power.
Saravak snorted, for an instant that cocky youth she remembered.
He was proved wrong in both instances. I first discovered of the prophecy and the path to godhood when trying to learn more of the dark blood within me. Rielter was very keen to harness my heritage, and spent the fortunes of his house retrieving tomes and forgotten lore from all corners of Faerun. What he did not know, was that I had begun my own research into the matter of my blood. It was over in the west of high in the Troll Mountains, where I made the discovery that power in the mortal realm was only the beginning. My research had uncovered the location of surviving sect of Baalites. They harbored no children themselves and so meant little threat to me, and they were glad to welcome another of the enduring faithful. I went in disguise and with a great deal of gold, and in their libraries I learned I was destined for a greater triumph.
He smiled humorlessly,
or so I thought. And when was that?
He shrugged impassively.
About 3 years before the Iron Crisis. The texts I had read had spoken of the path to godhood, death on a scale that would bypass Baal and elevate the wielder to the divine in his place. The tomes were vague, though, about when this would occur. I dared not miss my chance and took matters into my own hands. I thought to hasten the process, bring my own tide of blood and force the decision then, killing as many of the children I could find along the way. Realtor and the others had already hatched their own plans to become lords of the Sword Coast, orchestrating the iron shortage while gathering slaves in their hidden mines to supply iron at their own price. And while they worked, I plotted behind them, reveling in the mounting fear and manipulating tensions between and the gate. That fool, Realtor. He actually congratulated me when he first discovered my plot. Said that talk of war had increased the price of iron threefold, as though such petty profiteering was within my regard then. His death was not the first, but it freed me like no other had before. One father was dead. And you were ready to dethrone the other,
confirmed Fritha. Saravik nodded.
As you say, sister. But why? Why?
He repeated, a sudden fire back to those dead eyes.
Bah! How can you expect to understand when you would ask such asinine questions? With our blood, it is the only fitting end, and it was to be mine. I had brought war. I was to bathe in the blood of nations. I stopped you.
Saravik exhaled slowly, the fire's dying.
Yes, sister, you did. So, what was your life like before then, before you discovered,
she slathered a spiteful scorn upon the words,
your true destiny? Strict, but comfortable. I was expected to keep up the appearance of a young Sembian noble. From what I've heard of the place, I imagine that gave you quite a bit of leeway. Indeed,
Saravik nodded, with what could have almost been a smile.
Under Realtor's instruction, I spent time with the other young nobles of our circle, gambling, attending gatherings, all the while being trained in deception, manipulation, and the other tools of commerce, as well as specializing my more marital skills. Were you ever in love? As if that matters.
He spluttered. Fritha smiled knowingly.
Was she pretty?
Saravik sighed, the defeated old man once more.
She was from Karatur. Tomoko entered the service of our house as a spy, one of many in my father's employ, for trading in Sembia is cutthroat at best. She posed as a trader from the eastern lands and gathered information on our enemies. She was capable and quick, but there was an innocence to her, too, that few men could resist, however shrewd. I cared for her once, but when I learned of my potential, nothing could be allowed to stand in my way. She tried to dissuade me from my path, said she could not bear to see what I was becoming, though she never found the will to leave.
His face twisted with a disgusted sneer.
Even after I took another to my bed. I thought nothing of it at the time, her affections just another insignificance to be brushed aside on my journey to godhood. And now?
He paused, an immeasurable emptiness to his worn, grey face.
Now, I am dead and I know nothing of her. In the executions followed your end, she was not among them.
Saravik said nothing, eyes gazing out across that tiled plain. Fritha watched him with a frown.
Do you feel responsible for their deaths?
Saravik whipped back to her.
Why should I? They followed for power I gave and the greatness I promised. She didn't. No,
he conceded reluctantly,
but Tomoko was different. She knew me before I discovered my destiny. So only, Tomoko knew you before you became the terror of the Sword Coast.
Saravik shifted, clearly twitching in his own skin.
She and some of the others, but they all looked to themselves in the end. If I had been alive to hand over to the Flaming Fist in order to spare their own necks, they'd have done it. Do you honestly believe that? Do not question their loyalty, Saravik. You may have despised them for it, but it has its value. Your followers had plenty of chances to betray you and each one fought to the death, for you.
In the first instance in their time together, Saravik looked rattled, the man uncrossing his legs as though he would rise and quit her company. Were there anywhere else to go?
So? Whatever their reasons, it is pointless to dwell on this. My allies are dead, as am I.
Yes, you are,
she agreed succinctly,
though escaping your rightful punishment, for the time being, at least. Let us hope they are not so fortunate.
The warrior scowled, but said no more, and Frithha went back to her lute, returning to writhing worries and leaving him to his. End of chapter.